Dr. Kim Garchar, welcome back to Lucid Commons.
Thank you for having me again. I enjoy our conversation, so I'm very pleased to be back. Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you back. Can we start with who is Kim Garchar?
Absolutely. I am Dr. Kim Garchar. My PhD is in philosophy. I specialize in pragmatism, ethics, and clinical ethics, which means I'm also an ethics consultant for a regional hospital. And I enjoy talking about all things death, dying, and afterlife.
So, in part one, we got into more of your clinical ethics work and
hmm
talking about the practical reality of death and dying and what that
hmm
looks like in our healthcare system, and talking
Yep.
about different things like, the two things that mark the human condition, fallibility and finality. We talked about living wills. We talked about how
Yeah.
to have a practical conversation about death with your loved ones that's not
hmm
uncomfortable. I'm excited to dive into, in this conversation, more on the different schools of thought around
hmm
death and dying. So I know you had mentioned existentialism last time, and
hmm
thinkers like Sartre, Camus, Beauvoir.
hmm
Can we dive into how you discovered the French philosophers and existentialism and
Yeah.
that whole school of thought?
Okay. The historical, like the factual basis of my answer to your question is I discovered it when I was first discovering philosophy because one of the professors I had was influenced by the French philosophers, especially Beauvoir. And at the time, I thought, this is interesting. And since then, it's sort of had a hook in me. It was not a subject that I specialized in while studying philosophy, and I don't specialize in it now. But I have found an adherence to that belief system. And by adherence to, I mean it resonates with me. I think it's justifiable. It's not something that I prescribe in any way. So that's how I came to sort of embrace existentialism. But where would you like to start in diving into it?
Yeah, for someone who's never even heard the word existentialism, right? Imagine literally like a freshman sitting in your intro
Mhm.
to philosophy or intro to ethics course.
Sure.
How would you present existentialism, and what was it about that idea that was so powerful that really resonated with you?
Okay. To start with, let me just clarify. I resonate with the French existentialists primarily, and there are even within existentialism, there are different schools of thought. So the French existentialists, the three that you mentioned, are the three that I resonate with, and they are atheist. So please understand that the overview I give will be of that school of thought. You do not need to be atheist to be an existentialist. Kierkegaard or Kierkegaard is an example of that, where we have a Christian believer who is also existentialist. So I'm giving a particular school of thought. And the way I would introduce it to a freshman is that sometimes humans believe that they were born with a purpose, or sometimes humans believe that they are born to discover or unearth a meaning of their life. Okay, or I should explain, the meaning of their life. The French existentialists all believe that we are born without consent, which is true no matter what you believe. No one consents to be born. But we are born without consent. We are born with no meaningful life planned out for us. We are born with no purpose. We are simply born. Okay. And that is true for everyone, is their belief. And so our job instead of looking to the universe or looking to religious leaders or looking to, self-improvement books, our job is to look inside and decide what our purpose is, what is meaningful to us, what is valuable to us. That is what we have to do. Now, this is both a huge responsibility because what we decide for ourselves, we project onto others because we are social creatures. But it's also hugely freeing, right? If we decide we want a different society or a society that values different things, we can do that. There is nothing inherent about human society, human beings, humanity, other than that we get born, we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to die. Those are the things that are inherent. Everything else we create. And it's not that it feels initially, right? Sometimes when people hear that, they're like, this is terrifying. They feel adrift. And Sartre actually coined this. I mean, this is what he means when he talks about nausea, that if you really grasp this idea for the first time and you've not contemplated it before, and you're coming from a place where perhaps you believe that there was an intelligent design agent who put you here for a reason, it can be absolutely nauseating. But it is so freeing and also, I think, powerful to be able to create the life you want, the society you want, and not just what you want, right? You can't do that. That's sociopathic. But you can create your life. You, in conjunction with other humans, can create the society that you want. So I think I still understand the terror because it's on us. Everything is on us, right? If we live in the United States right now and we are not politically actively saying we want a change, we are complicit in what's going on. And further, even those of us saying we want a change, are we doing anything to bring about a change? That's the important question. So we don't get to sit, for example, on our sofas and say, I didn't vote for him, not my problem. That doesn't work. You live here, you're responsible, you have freedom to act, and you and your neighbors or citizens or whatever it is, it's on you, right? And I'm not endorsing any particular voting system or anything like that. This is about the human being understanding their role and the responsibility they gain in being born into this world.
So to a young Kim Garchar, what was so refreshing and what was so powerful about discovering the French existentialists? When you were in that season of life, what was really resonating with you about that? The fact that you get this freedom, you get this opportunity to author your own life and author your own meaning. I'm really curious about who you were in that moment and why that was so powerful and why that has stuck with you throughout all these years.
Just a little background. I graduated in the 90s. I will date myself. In the 90s with a mathematics degree. And I, like many young students, had not really thought out, what is my life going to look like with this? And so I went to a master's program. I didn't understand that what I loved about math was the theory. I went to an applied program, which was operational engineering, and I despised it. And I dropped out after the first semester. I'm living in Colorado, and I fall back on serving in restaurants, at instructing skiing, those sorts of what you do when you're 21, okay? And I fell into a lifestyle that was fabulous for that point in my life. I worked for mountain resorts, I worked for ski resorts. I had friends who skied with me every summer. All we did, we all got off work, we'd be home by 5:30. We always met. We played volleyball, we rollerbladed, we biked, we hiked. I was part of that Colorado, young adult lifestyle, and it was wonderful. I loved it. But I eventually, and all my friends too, we all were like, huh, hmm. And we all had college degrees. None of us were working in the area of our degrees, but we started thinking like, and we didn't have conversations about this. This was pretty individual, but we started thinking we wanted something else out of life. I had a friend that decided to go to med school. She was thinking she would do that eventually, but she had some time off. I had a friend who was a journalist decide he was going to become an IT guy. I had my math degree, and I was like, yeah, I want something else too. So I went back to school intending to get philosophy classes so I could go on into clinical ethics. So I just come through this transition, and I started hearing about these thinkers, and I was like, exactly, we can create, right? We can decide. So I was so excited by these philosophies that were saying you choose your life, you choose your path. And I was simply energized by those philosophies. I have to admit, that first time round, I wasn't hit by the responsibility side. In fact, it took me a while to work out why I was responsible for everybody else too, right? Because when you're 24, 25, and it didn't hit, but the freedom hit, the creativity hit. And then I did go back to grad school and started reading more carefully and started processing more. There was then a second wave of, yeah, okay, I am responsible for the repercussions of all my decisions, but also for the decisions I allow from others without speaking up. So I apologize for the history, personal history, but my sort of, again, resonance with the French existentialists came in waves. So
I asked about the personal history, so don't apologize for it. It's a part of who you are today, and it
it is.
helped us understand how you got there. So thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit more about the freedom
Yeah.
aspect that you discovered first, right? Freedom was the first wave.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've been thinking about lately is how dizzying and disorienting freedom can be when you
Yes.
realize, in fact, actually how free you are.
That is the flip side. Exactly.
And as empowering and exciting as it is, like you said, it is terrifying.
Right.
And that's one thing I didn't realize until, we were talking about my recent career pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one thing that I was not expecting
Right.
is when you realize, in fact, how free you are, it is so destabilizing. And your brain,
Absolutely.
we even talked about what our brain does with uncertainty, right?
Hmm.
We are immune to uncertainty, right? We try
Exactly.
we
Our
try to
brain
grab
is like,
on.
no, no.
Yes. We grab onto anything, like anything that we have, we retreat, right? And I'm curious about you were living quite a free life, right? I mean, sounds like a really cool life out in Colorado.
Yeah, no
So,
debt, totally
yeah.
supporting ourselves,
Wow.
playing every night.
Hmm. Okay. So you had a sense of practical, lived freedom, every
Hmm.
single day. So when you discovered this school of thought that was freeing, but in a different way, can you talk a little bit more about that distinction between you living a sense of
Yeah,
freedom, in your 20s, and then this kind of philosophical, this deeper sense of freedom that you uncovered?
yeah. I guess a few things. I grew up in a very small town um, that was very isolated from cities, and it was because it was rural and isolated. It was very conservative, and I watched my friends um, being married straight out of high school to high school sweethearts. And um, I never felt compelled to do that. I, but I always felt I was also weird for not feeling that. I had other ambitions. I wasn't sure what those ambitions were, but I didn't want to live here anymore or there anymore, and I didn't want to get married right away. Those and of course, then no children. And for people who decide that, there is no criticism, there is no judgment. I'm just trying to describe that I never resonated with that idea. Um, and so I moved to a city and then discovered this, period where I didn't spend much money, so I could support myself, but still play like all the time. And by play, I mean, the mountain stuff, right? Um, and so when I discovered existentialism, looking back, I was like, okay, I shouldn't be judged negatively for that period in my life where I was playing. And it is a period where sometimes adults look at young people and kind of shame them for not prioritizing certain values, marriage, children, etc. I mean, that still happens. So, on the one hand, it was very validating to me that I could justify that lifestyle, but it also validated the idea that I wanted to do something else, right? That I was going somewhere else. Now, it was terrifying to go back to school, to stop earning money full time, changing my economic and financial status substantially, and I wasn't very good at that. um, it was terrifying to think about failure, right? What if I don't pass this class? What if I don't get a job? What if I don't? So the earlier lifestyle was comfortable because it was, as you say, not, well, I should say, it was stable, right? It was very stable. We knew we had a meeting spot that we all met at, like, and then we decided what we were going to do. Um, and this new path was terrifying because tenure track jobs are rare at this point. I didn't want to work for a corporate hospital. It it was it was terrifying. I mean, I had health consequences because of the uncertainty.
Hmm.
I was lucky. It worked out for me. But now, right, I'm facing a different stage in life. And again, the terror of the freedom is by inertia takes over because we're programmed for that. And yet, I have these certain things that I want to do. They would have other consequences in my life. And what if I try to do that and it doesn't work? Those sorts of things. It is terrifying. And that is precisely what the French existentialists were trying to point out. If you really understand how free you are, none of your inertia is justifiable as like, well, I have bills to pay, which is my one of my basic issues, no longer justifiable. Mm-mm. You decide, right? You decide what you want to do and you live with those consequences, but there are an infinite number of options for you. And trying to come to a place where you believe that there is one option that is the best, first of all, hard. Coming to the place where you believe that you're going to change your life now for that other option is hard. Trying to convince your family and your friends that this is the right decision is hard. And then actually doing it is terrifying because you can't predict the results. So that is precisely what the existentialists were trying to get us to understand, right? Nausea for Sartre. Camus said, you know, the whole human condition can be summed up in this way. I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, we yell into the universe, what is the meaning of life? We desperately want this answer. And he says, he's like, it's not that the universe answers back and says there is none. No, there simply is no answer. It's an abyss. There is no voice. There is no one there to tell you, or even tell you that they won't tell you. There is nothing. It is silent. It is an abyss. And this is where, I mean, Nietzsche was existed long before the Camus, but Nietzsche had this famous line, you stare into the abyss, and the abyss stares back. He wasn't trying to personify the abyss. He was simply saying there's nothing but abyss that comes back at you. So
Hmm.
that's where
And
we are.
that itself is maddening,
Hmm.
just like freedom is terrifying, not getting an answer is.
That is exactly how we all react, right? That it
Mhm.
is maddening.
Hmm.
Um,
So, what do you think was grounding? I couldn't imagine living as a French existentialist, living with just that idea, right? So, where do they go? What is grounding for them? Is it this sense of responsibility and ownership now that you take of your life? Where do we go from this
mhm.
realization that freedom is in fact terrifying?
Yeah, so responsibility is a huge part of it. Camus famously used the myth of Sisyphus as an example. So if folks don't know, Sisyphus did something to anger the gods. I can't remember what. And he was condemned to push a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down and he'd have to push it again for eternity. Okay. And Camus used this as an example. And his conclusion was, look, we have to imagine Sisyphus happy. Like, we have to do that. We have to keep living, not with hope, right? That's the difference. Is most of us think, yeah, Sisyphus is just hoping that he'll be released from this. And Camus says hope is not justified, right?
Mm.
That one's scary too. And I quite like Camus because I find him to be the darkest, but he's the most kind of, um, I think, dreadful of the existentialists. Beauvoir, on the other hand, says, look, we have to look at where we are, right, as human beings in this existential framework. And we have to recognize that our existential freedom is only fully recognized. And by recognized, I mean allowed to flourish when everyone else's existentialism is also fully recognized, allowed to flourish. And so she was moving very much in the direction of an ethical theory, existential ethical theory, um, that motivated us to recognize the freedom of others. And one of my very favorite books of all time is Simone de Beauvoir's um, um, Ethics of Ambiguity, because the existential condition is an ambiguous one, right? We are both free and totally responsible, those sorts of things. And so I really appreciate the direction she was moving in. And all three, Sartre, Camus, and Beauvoir, all three of the existentialists lived through World War II, and were in different roles in World War II. But World War II was highly influential in their philosophies, and Beauvoir worried a lot about our freedom and what we do as free people when we find ourselves enslaved, for lack of a better word, under an oppressor. Because our freedom means that we should overthrow the oppressor. But to do that, we would be using the tools of the oppressor, namely violence, dehumanization, these sorts of things. We would use those same tools to overthrow. In other words, we become oppressors ourselves. And her final, one of her conclusions that she came to in an essay titled An Eye for an Eye is that violence may be required to overthrow oppression, but we should understand that we will lose some of our own humanity in doing so. Our characters do not come through unscathed. We bring moral harm to ourselves in doing so, and yet it might be required. So it's a complicated, way out of existentialism, but I think the underlying ideas also have resonated with me in thinking about death and afterlife. If you have
Yeah.
other theoretical questions about the existentialists, let me know.
Okay. I do have one question about the myth of Sisyphus and
Mm-hmm.
hope. If we can dwell there for a second, and then, yeah, then let's go into their view
Sure.
on the afterlife, and then we can dive into maybe monotheism, Buddhism, other schools
Mhm.
of thought.
Perfect.
So, when you were talking about the myth of Sisyphus and us kind of having to come to terms with, okay, well, we have to think he's happy or we have to think he's hopeful. But the Camus said, well, no, we can't, there is no hope, right?
Mhm.
So I'm trying to imagine how we can think of Sisyphus day after day, pushing this boulder up the hill just to know. It makes me think, okay, like understanding the certainty and the finality of death, does that make life not worth living? Like, I think that's the question. I mean, the answer is no. I would say no, right? But
Yes, I
that's almost
agree.
that's what the myth of Sisyphus makes me think of. And I'm also thinking too, I would maybe liken his position and his experience to Viktor Frankl's Search for Meaning.
Hmm.
Have
Hmm.
what is the title? Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor
Hmm.
Frankl, right? So I read that a few years back, my 1L year. And the thing that I don't know, that really struck me about that book is it wasn't necessarily hope that the prisoners in Auschwitz had.
Precisely.
It wasn't hope.
Precisely.
It was, he says, if man has a why, he can suffer almost anyhow, right?
Hmm.
And it was these little acts of humanity that the
Hmm.
prisoners in Auschwitz had, and that was their why. If it was,
Precisely.
yeah, and that that I think is what gets us through this idea, this
That
absurdity
is it.
of death and screaming into the abyss, right? Is
Hmm.
getting to create your own meaning. And even in the, you said, in the most oppressed,
Yeah.
enslaved conditions,
Hmm.
dehumanizing conditions, you still can find that choice within you and that
That's
agency
right.
within you to say, I'm going to make some meaning right now. And he gives some examples of like his prison mates would give up their food to a hungrier, starving
Exactly.
mate. And that was how they created meaning. And
Precisely.
that's where that's where I'm landing, just with everything that you said, because it's grounding, when I do think
Hmm.
about this sense of freedom and the absurdity of death and just screaming into the abyss.
Hmm.
It resonates with this French existentialism is resonating
Precisely.
with me too, because it's empowering. You
Hmm.
get to create your own meaning no matter what life throws at you or what the circumstances are, what your situation is. You will always have that agency to create something
Hmm.
beautiful
Hmm.
and something meaningful out of those conditions, right? Yeah, I mean,
Yes, exactly.
any other thoughts that you have on this idea of hope? That's also one thing that I'm hung up on
Yeah.
is why can't we hope?
Now, to be fair, right? Camus is the one that, so far as I understand it, really distinguishes or calls out hope. He has quite a few bifurcations, right? And like we can't hope, but we keep going. And it then becomes, well, how do we keep going if we can't hope? We have to create something else, right? We have to create these small acts. And I will just add that Camus, quite famously, has said roughly the only important philosophical question is why we don't commit suicide. Now, the majority of humans don't, right? Some do. But the question is, why do you keep going? When you are at rock bottom, how do you keep going? Because we all do. We all are. So for some people, right, and I know we'll talk about this going forward, but for some people, the reason they keep going is because they believe God has given them a purpose that they need to continue to work to fulfill. Others keep going because they're, I I say this jokingly, I do not mean it in any pejorative sense, but you know, you keep going because scornfully, like I will not be beat. I'm not going to let this beat me. And many people are in places where they keep living simply to keep living. And so I'm not trying to dismiss those cases, but I think most people understand joking around that, as I told you earlier, this plant exists out of pure scorn because I neglect it, and yet it's majestic,
It
right?
is. It is
So
majestic.
this is how I mean living scornfully. And some people live for other people. Some people live for other purposes. Some people live for certain events. We know in hospitals, if you're working in geriatrics or ICU, we come across patients who are like, I just want to see my daughter get married in 3 months. Can we make it for 3 months? Okay. And they will fight and I shouldn't use that word fight. They and their team work together such that they're attempting to make this goal, right? And had an ethics consult some time ago. It was a small child, and the family said, we want this child to make it to their 4th birthday because they're very excited about that. And the child did, and the child died on that day. So we have multiple examples of people who set goals, right? And again, those goals can be anything, but they choose a goal. They choose it and they focus on it. And it's no longer in that situation, no longer a question of hope. It is, I want, right? I am doing things to move to this goal. It becomes motivational. It becomes, I don't know what else to say besides motivational. Everything is focused there. And that's, to me, that seems different than hope. And
Will.
to be fair, I have colleagues who work on hope as a philosophical topic and embrace that concept. And so that is that school of thought exists. I am not trying to dismiss hope as motivational for certain people. By all means, hope if you live your hope. But don't simply think because you hope something happens and then you don't
will it to happen.
act, yeah, to will it to happen. At least as far as the existentialists go, no, that's not. And that's the problem with Sisyphus, right? Is he can hope it stops, but that's meaningless unless he's acting to make it stop, and he can't. So just give it up, right? Now that's terrifying because then it becomes torture, right? We understand where he is, and Camus keeps saying, but keeps going, keeps going. But any sense of hope that Sisyphus would have is meaningless because he is unable to act to achieve that hope. And that's, I think, what Camus is really saying.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you for rounding that out. I'm curious what the French existentialists, what do they think comes next? Is there a next?
To be fair, I haven't read them on afterlife issues. I'm not sure what kind of literature is out there. But as atheists, I think they believe that we end, right? Just like
That's it.
everything
Lights out.
else. And again, to be fair, I haven't read them on the afterlife. Beauvoir has written about death, and I've read that, but I don't know if any of them wrote specifically on what happens after we die. But given the literature I have read, given their philosophical stance, I would say they don't believe anything comes after. If there is something that comes after, it's going to have the same kind of, I don't want to say freedom because I don't believe that they think there is some internal self that goes on. They might be aligned with secular Buddhism if that's a place you want to go.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that an atheist would not spend much time thinking
Yeah.
about the afterlife if they don't think that there's anything there, right? I was just, in my mind, to be an atheist is to believe that what, it's just lights out, it's just nothingness, right? Is that the
I
idea?
I think I will carve out a section to say that there might be atheists who believe in our known physical laws, right? So that energy isn't destroyed, and they might buy that kind of idea that something goes somewhere because there was this energy and now there is only matter. So there might be some atheists that allow for or um, believe in some kind of energy transfer,
Hmm.
but I don't think atheists in general have any belief in the idea that a person, what we know as ourselves, continues on.
Hmm. Okay. Now, you and I were both raised in a monotheistic school of thought.
Yep,
So let's dive into monotheism and that school of thought on death and dying before diving into Buddhism, because I do want to get
sure.
there. I appreciate Buddhism very much. So, the way that we were raised, both Catholics,
Hmm.
there is heaven.
The
There's heaven.
great reward.
Okay, so you being a philosopher that studies death and dying,
Mhm.
what was it like for you to rectify your understanding growing up of death and dying in an afterlife, and then to experience these new schools of thought that were really resonating with you?
Mhm.
And did you experience, a discomfort, a cognitive dissonance? What
Yes.
was that feeling like to have your whole upbringing, this idea of
Mhm.
heaven, right,
Yeah.
questioned and to evolve into a different belief system? What was that
Yeah.
like?
Um, I was troubled by some doctrine of the Catholic Church early when I was a teenager, still in high school. And most of the things I was uh, had a problem with were gender related. That was my first little bit of, revolution. Um, Now, I appreciated that the priests would have, conversations about this, right? That what it wasn't a taboo subject. So I appreciated that. But once I got out of high school and got to college, started thinking, my my shift did not come primarily from the belief in the afterlife. I started recognizing, well, this was when the church was found guilty of all of the sex crimes, right? Like, I lived through that. And that was horrifying. And coupled with my gender questions, I was like, no, this isn't for me. And so I really, you know, left the church. But I became a recovering Catholic. And by that, I do not mean I am a practicing Catholic, but I am reconciling different schools of thought as I watched some of my relatives live according to their beliefs. So, as I was discovering existentialism, right, you have to act, I also started witnessing, and by started, meaning they'd always been doing this, but I was only now coming to recognize it. Relatives who lived Christian belief and doctrine, right? I had grandparents who lived in a central city, and their parish was home to many impoverished and houseless people. And my grandparents went to every funeral service there was without knowing the person. They went because many times these houseless persons would have no one at their funeral, and my grandparents believed it was important that everyone be recognized and grieved.
Wow.
That is some commitment, along with many other services that they provided to their fellow and sister humans. They shopped for nursing homes. They did groundkeeping, right? And it was moving to watch them do this. I now have other relatives. I have an aunt and cousins who do similar things. And I started recognizing that if people live their beliefs, right, this is still existential. And we could go back to Kierkegaard for folks who aren't atheists. This was his whole point. You got to live your belief. And that allowed me to reconcile it with my existentialism, because we weren't like leaning on the death, dying afterlife. It was how they lived and their beliefs now. And I still don't have a way to reconcile the Catholic belief or even wider Christian belief in heaven with my resonance with existentialism. They are different endpoints to the metaphysical question, right? And there are challenges and issues with the Christian Catholic version. There are challenges to existentialism as well. But I will point out that there are, some problematic questions that come along with a monotheistic belief in a perfect afterlife. And they all come back to the ones I'll mention, come back to the body, that we're talking about transitioning from a life here that is physical to an afterlife that is not physical. And some churches, will eschew, if not condemn, things like organ donation or cremation, because they believe you carry your body into the afterlife in some way, so that there is a body there. But does that mean if you die at 96, with perhaps I'm making this up, an inability to walk, an inability to control bodily functions, is that the body that goes with you to heaven? Maybe. And it's just not a sufferable thing there. If you are an infant and you have not lived a full life, is that what goes with you to heaven? Like, what kind of body follows you? And I always think that is a compelling question. There are challenges to existentialism as well, which is, I believe that my grandmother is still watching me or connected with me in some way. There are challenges on both sides. So I'm just trying to point out the idea that heaven exists. One, I think, is highly coercive. Many people act only to get into heaven, and that's a sham. But two, this idea is still problematic to me because no one's been able to spell out, and no one will be able to spell out exactly what it is. And I guess that takes me back to Judaism, where there isn't a clear prescription about what happens after the afterlife. They think something happens, but they don't know what. And so there's no speculation, which takes me back to Socrates, who was like, yeah, I think something happens. I think I'm going to be freed from this, fleshy body, but I think the fleshy body is what keeps me from knowing stuff. So I think like I'm going somewhere. The intellect, this soul, is going somewhere, but this is going to be freeing. We go back to freeing, right? Freeing because I'm going to be able to know stuff and learn stuff that I can't do here while I'm stuck in this little flesh chamber, right? So I kind of see a little bit of a backwards flow there. And back to the answer, I can't easily reconcile the idea about afterlife, but I can reconcile the belief and action with existentialism.
Hmm. So, since you brought up Socrates, I'm thinking of Plato. So, this idea that Catholics and Christians believe that there is a heaven, they're certain that there
Mhm,
is a heaven, and that, like you said, is a motivator and sometimes coercive
mhm,
to get you to act or behave a certain way
mhm,
in this
mhm.
life so that you can get through these pearly gates, right?
Precisely.
So, the certainty that Catholics or Christians sometimes have, right? This
Mhm,
conviction that there is a heaven. But then the corollary that, okay, people who are maybe afraid of death or fear death, I
mhm,
know that Plato, one of his perspectives on death was, well, to fear death
mhm,
is for you to think that you are so wise and so clever because you think that it's something to be feared. You are
mhm.
convinced that it is something that is to be feared on the other side. How can you know? How can you possibly know?
Precisely. Yeah.
And that's kind of where I land, right? How can we, just any monotheistic religion, how can Catholics, how can Christians have this deep conviction? And it almost took me to this place where I was wondering, okay, is it just beyond our comprehension, our human physical body, the brains that we have? It's just simply beyond our comprehension, like the size of the universe, to
Mhm,
imagine the idea that we simply cease to exist, that there's nothing. We can't imagine that there is nothing after this
mhm,
life. So is it the case that we have to construct
mhm,
something to
mhm.
believe in something after to get us through this
Yeah.
physical existence, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's one theory I have floating around.
Yeah. And I can't remember. I think it was Heidegger. Um, and to be honest, I'm not a Heidegger reader. I'm not a Hegel reader. So, but I think Heidegger really embraced this question and came up with the fact or the claim that we can't envision our death, which is why we manufacture a bunch of other stuff.
Okay.
We can't get our head around the idea of the, we can't get our head around the thing that is asking the question, what is death, won't exist, right? Like you can't escape
Hmm.
that consciousness. We can't imagine something that is not that.
Hmm.
So I will say that. But I agree with you. I think there is a certain kind of hubris in claiming that there is a certain afterlife. We know the concept of hell has evolved and changed dramatically, especially since the Middle Ages. The entire way we conceive of hell as this flaming pit with a devil and horns and everything, not in the Bible. Um, so, and here comes the noisy cat. The concept of hell has evolved. I think probably the concept of heaven has, although I haven't read as much on that. I mean, these ideas that Catholics and Christians hold, we need to understand those are shaped historically, contextually, culturally. all of those things. They are not in any way unified or hegemonic or singular. You talk to different kind of Christians, they're going to give you a very different picture of the afterlife, right? So, some Christians are going to say like, yeah, there's no body involved. Like, you can cremate me. I'm not proud. Like, I don't have a problem with that. Yes, I'm a Christian. I don't have a problem with that. Talk to other Christians, they're going to say no cremation, no organ donation, all of that. So you get different pictures even within the Christian faith. And I think that's why I'm more drawn to Judaism's viewpoint on the afterlife, which is more in line with epistemic humility, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Admitting that you don't know, which is, yeah, something's probably going to happen. Yep, we think that because there's a life force now, so why wouldn't it do
Mm-hmm.
something? But making a claim about what that looks like,
Mm-hmm.
mm,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly
no.
it. That's exactly it. I think as I've grown older, I think that is what I have kind of this like immune reaction to
Mhm.
is such certainty about
Mm,
your perspective on what happens when literally none of us know.
exactly.
We don't know.
Exactly. No, this
Um,
is this is precisely it. And that could be widened beyond the death and dying conversation.
mhm,
But I struggle with that same certainty. Anyone who is saying, I know this, as opposed to I believe this, right? That's different. And I mean,
mhm,
I have a belief on what will happen. That doesn't mean I'm right about it. It just means it's the thing that helps me organize my world, right? I have a picture, I have an idea, I believe it, but I have no idea whether I'm right, and I won't if my picture is right, which is, you know, that there is no self that goes anywhere, but energy does. I personally won't know it even when I die. So, and Buddha said this, that it's a bit meaningless to ask questions about stuff we'll never know. I don't agree with that because I think talking about the afterlife is as important as talking about death, though you can't, those two things are tied. But his point was, we're never going to know, right? We don't know. We don't
mhm,
know the structure of the universe. Give it up. Don't waste your time on it. Ask questions about the stuff that matters right now. And
mm,
that has motivated me too and moved me towards pragmatism. Different conversation. But, the idea that we can't know what's out there. It doesn't stop us from asking questions. And again, as I said, I think the questions are important as we, for example, become an aging society, but they're also important philosophically. So I think the metaphysical questions are worthwhile, but they become problematic when people assume that they have the answer, right?
mm,
The questions are okay, and that pondering is helpful. It's healthy. But when people land in a place where, like, I know this is how it's going to work, um, I prickle at
mhm,
that. So,
mhm.
yeah.
Can we dive more into Buddhism? So, your idea of an afterlife or what happens to our physical being is that we transition, we
Mm-hmm.
disperse
Mm-hmm.
into a different type of energy or
Right.
existence. And that
Mm-hmm.
seems to be in line with secular Buddhism.
I
Okay,
hope so.
can we talk more about that?
Sure. Um, Secular Buddhists tend to, and I will give the disclaimer here, I am not an expert in religion. I am not an expert in Buddhism. So these will be very broad claims that I may be wrong about. I believe I'm correct. That's why I'm making the claim. But I admit I may be wrong. Secular Buddhists tend to resonate with what are known to be Buddha's teachings, right? So, as I alluded to a little bit ago, at least one division of Buddhists believe that there is no real self, okay? There is no thing that is me or no thing that is you. And that belief system and they believe anatman. I hope I'm using that properly. Atman is the word in Hindu that does refer to the thing that continues. And so anatman means no thing, no real self. And I will emphasize, there are different schools of thought within Buddhism. I'm talking about the more secular one. There's one that involves pictures of an afterlife with demons, right? And these things, but it's not eternal. That picture of the afterlife is where you go, everything is about you learning, right? So if you end up they don't use the word hell, but if you end up being punished in the afterlife, it's because you need to learn something, usually humility of some sort, but you need to learn something. The side of Buddhism that I'm talking about is not focused on or does not believe in that core self. We may end up coming back in different forms, but that coming back is again meant to teach us to recognize there is no core self. The whole point is to let go of that illusion of a self, right? And that is when you reach enlightenment. So this is what the Buddha supposedly achieved, and this is what he taught, right? Our job as humans was to understand that we don't exist as individual selves, right? We are all connected. Everybody connected. We are connected to the universe. The universe is connected to us, but we're connected to all other human beings, just like they are connected to us, which moves more into that like idea from Beauvoir that my freedom isn't actually in existence until everyone's freedom is recognized. Same idea. And so the idea is that the universe exists as it's supposed to exist. No claims about a God that made it. It's just everything exists. And there's a way that it's supposed to exist. And we move from that to the idea of karma. And in our American society, of course, most people know the saying, but karma is a bitch, right? Meaning karma is like payback. If you do something wrong, something bad will happen to you. That's part of it. But the Buddhist conception, from what I understand, is that no one is coming back to get you, right? There's no like figure named karma that's keeping track who's going to come down and like hit you with a lightning bolt or something. It's rather that there is a universe that we are part of. And when we act appropriately, accordingly, morally, we contribute goodness to that universe. And therefore, the universe gets better and we flourish. When we act immorally, inappropriately, right, we make the universe worse. And so, for my existence in that universe is also worsened, right? So, it's not a payback issue. It is about understanding connection to others. I'm sorry I moved away from death and dying there a little bit, but
No,
the
I
whole
love it.
point, my understanding of secular Buddhism, is to truly recognize your, I don't want to say connection to because that still emphasizes the self, but your existence as in
Mhm.
this place, this universe, and to let go of your existence as that being, right? We have to
Mhm.
understand that the cat who is, you know, in my lap right now, is the same stuff that I am.
Mhm.
So if I treat the cat well, right, the universe will be better. If I mistreat the cat, the universe will be worse. And it's not the harm or benefit to the cat that's what cat, I mean, that's part of it. But, you know, it's not the idea that if I harm this cat, I will have someone harm me. It's not
Mhm.
that kind of payback. It's about a participation in this much larger thing that we don't know about, right? There is something. The belief is there's something, right? But we don't know what it is.
Mhm.
And so I find it easiest to think about that something like in terms of physics, right? Like energy. Um,
Mhm.
that there is this thing that exists. We are all part of it. In the meantime, I have been kind of, I, whatever my energy is, has been constrained in this body. I should recognize my body is not what I am, and I should recognize that I am not what I am, and move away from that. Right? That is the point, is to recognize when you dissolve the body, what are you left with? Energy. What else do you share with other living things? Energy. So can you think along those lines?
To me, it just it's refreshingly simple. If you are putting good energy out
Yeah,
into the world,
the world
then
gets
the
better.
world gets better, right? It doesn't have to come with this rule book
Hmm.
or traditions or
Hmm.
this idea, this elaborate idea of an afterlife. Why do we need all of that to just be a good human
Yeah.
being while we're here, you know? Um, I'm
I think
wondering,
though,
yeah,
I was just going to follow up on that.
yeah.
It goes back to that same existentialist claim. If you truly recognize there is no thing, right, that you are and you don't have a purpose, that is terrifying. So the
Mm-hmm.
same thing. When I was teaching a little bit of Buddhism in my classes, students were horrified by the idea that they, you know, that there wasn't a core self. I mean, they
Mm,
found that horrifying, which is why I think like the existentialists were great because they captured that feeling, nausea, terror, anxiety, these sorts of things. But it's the same idea. So if you believe this, if you believe in the way that I believe, I think when I die, I will become absolutely nothing. And at the same time, absolutely everything, right? Myself no longer exists, but my energy returns to the universe. I don't know what will happen with that energy. But you are nothing and everything. I find that freeing. My students were terrified. They could only see the nothingness part.
hmm,
And by my students, I'm talking about majority students or the
mhm,
vocal students.
mhm,
But yeah, it's the same issues that we encountered in existentialism.
mhm. What is what are their responses? What is so terrifying about that to them? And then do you kind of guide them through this? Well, no, it's actually really exciting and empowering, and you get to author your life, and this is what it actually means, right? So once you hit them with the terror, what what are the reactions? What comes next?
It's easier when you're doing existentialism than religion. But yeah, when they really struggled with the no self stuff and nothingness, trying to focus on the everything, the connection, what it means when you are alive to know about that connection. How do you conceptualize your life if you know about that connection or recognize it or take it to heart, believe it, whatever verb you want to choose there, like how does your life work once you see that? Like are there common things like how you think about, I don't know, workers in certain industries, right? Maybe you don't treat servers well because you don't think, and by servers obviously restaurant servers, maybe you just don't think it's important, or maybe you don't think that you should have to tip, it's unfair, or maybe you just want a more submissive service or something like that. Um, Once you recognize that you and the server are the same thing, does that treatment change, right? Do you think differently there? Um, when there are so many examples, um, I personally, this is, and this isn't a secret, I confess it to all of my ethics classes. My biggest moral failing is that I am not vegetarian. Okay. I rarely eat meat, but sometimes I do. And encountering the data, the facts, and the absolute brutality of factory farming, right? I should never eat meat again. And to be fair, like when I buy eggs, they gotta be all like organically fed, free range, happy on a farm, local, that kind of stuff. Like that is my rule. But somehow every once in a while, when I want a steak, I eat the steak. Okay. Now, if I really think about the life that that cow had, right? It's disgusting. It is brutal. I look away from that more than I look away from horror movies, but I still do it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm either lying to myself or I don't actually comprehend.
Mm.
And if I were honest with myself, I'm going with the lying part. If I were honest with myself, I'd have to change my behavior. And that I think is terrifying to students, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we have so many practices and habits of not understanding these connections. And this is why we get the Buddhist dedication to nonviolence, right? The Eightfold Path. All of these things that most people know, kind of, at least in reference, are associated with Buddhism. I understand there are still certain problems in Buddhism, just like any other religion, and it can be twisted and so on, okay? Not claiming it's perfect in any way. But we do see most Buddhists attempting to live a life while understanding that connection, right? So, veganism, nonviolence, meditation, quietness, n- non accumulation of wealth or possessions, even, right? And so on.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that is where you wanted to go, but
Yeah.
please redirect.
So it's July 2026, and America celebrated its 250th birthday
Hmm.
this month. Given all of the schools of thought on death and dying that you've studied, all the different philosophies and
Mhm.
perspectives. If you could put one idea out
Mhm.
there into the world for American society and American culture and the dominant narrative around
Mhm.
death and dying, if we can even say there
Mhm.
is a narrative, because we're all afraid to talk about death and dying over here. But
Right. Mhm.
if there's an idea or a moment of clarity that you could impart on American culture regarding death and dying from all of your studies, is there one single idea or what would that be?
Live your belief system, right?
Mm.
Embrace it. Live your values. Regardless of your religious belief or non religious belief, live those values, right?
Mm.
If you're a monotheist, live those values, live them, be honest about what those religions say. For example, when we look at Christianity, right? There cannot be a gospel of wealth. God is not blessing you by giving you your private jet. Um, you should be helping to feed the hungry. Um, if you are Buddhist, live your beliefs, right? You have, we need to be consistent in the connection between act and belief. And folks like pragmatists would say that, that's not even a real distinction. They're the same thing. But any any belief system you have, be consistent. And I will add to that, in order to be consistent, you have to do some honest reflection on your belief system, right? You have to think about, what does the afterlife look like? Which means, how is, what is the connection between this life and the afterlife? What does that mean? Is it meaning that I have to create my own value system and system of meaning? And if so, how do I do that? How do I do it while respecting others? If there is an afterlife in which people will be rewarded, how do you live without making it look like you're being coerced into these actions? Like, how does your life really reflect those beliefs? And not, I will just say this, you can't just go to church on Sunday and call it quits, right? Like, how do you live day to day those beliefs? So one, thinking about them, and this goes back to the first conversation we had, which is, being able to talk about death, dying, and afterlife. In this case, I'm suggesting at least think about it, but please talk about it also, because it does inform all that clinical stuff. So think about it and then act consistently. Do not assume that your belief system forgives you from or excuses you from acting accordingly. I know the Catholics, we had, the rite of confession, all of that stuff, but even that wasn't forgiveness. It
Mm.
was then about making it up to people, right? You had to say prayers. You had to do things to show your contrition. So I'm just meaning, don't think that just because you go to church on Sunday, it forgives like cruelty during the week. No, it doesn't. So be consistent, because your understanding of the afterlife is fundamentally, metaphysically involved in your ethical belief system, right? And that is one thing I learned in grad school that I had no concept of before, right? Metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, those things are tied together. When you have a particular end goal, that determines how you act getting there. And I'm not saying that metaphysics came first. Some people claim ethics came first. Oh, that argument doesn't matter, because the bottom line is you can't talk about ethics without talking about metaphysics. Your belief in what is real, capital R, real, in the world, right, fundamentally shapes how you act. And when you have a metaphysical belief and you're not acting according to that, there's some lying going on, some hypocrisy, some something else. So, act according to your beliefs. Because all the belief systems say, be a good person.
That's the one unifying theme across every school of thought is
Yeah.
while you're here, be a good person.
Absolutely.
And I
Now,
resonate.
admittedly,
Mhm.
figuring out what that means, the devil's in the details. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm not claiming that's easy, but
Mhm.
no belief system, allows you to simply behave poorly without
Mhm.
consequences.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I
Please
really
continue.
resonate. I resonate with live your beliefs because I think at one point I found myself beliefs and values, right? At one point I
Mhm.
found
Oh, yeah,
myself
same
in
thing.
this cognitive dissonance between what I believed and
Mhm,
what I valued and the life I was living.
mhm,
And that's for some, I think that's painful to live in that cognitive dissonance
mhm.
once you realize it. And growing up as a child, I saw Catholicism, unfortunately, some of my family members as, kind of like how you were saying, an excuse to, or a shield to be a shitty person throughout the week, quite
Mhm,
frankly.
mhm,
And that I think to me was so appalling as a young girl.
mhm.
I was involved in, Life Teen and I would go to church on Sundays, I was a lector. I was very involved, but to have
CCD,
all the things,
reader,
yep,
yeah, all of
yep,
it.
all the
Me too.
things.
Me too.
But at the same time, I had this cognitive dissonance with my faith because growing up, I had seen family members who rejected other human beings in the name
Yeah.
of their faith, right?
Yeah.
Rejected their son for being gay,
Mhm.
rejected, their granddaughter's African American boyfriend.
Yeah.
And, this moment stuck with me from my childhood where my grandpa wouldn't shake his hand when meeting him for the first time. And that's like seared into my brain.
Mhm.
And I think it's so important too. And I think about this in being a mom now, right? That was a huge, becoming a mom, that life transition was a huge motivator to really examine, okay,
Mhm.
what do I value now, right? Acknowledging my priorities
Mhm.
have shifted. Uh, what do I value and am I living in accordance and in line
Yep.
with those values?
Mhm.
And it's so important to set that example for the next generation. They and kiddos, they are watching. They watch every
Everything.
single thing. It is
Yeah.
insane how much she's only 14 months, how much she
Yeah.
absorbs and just knows. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, I did want to ask you too.
Can I just add a
Yeah,
follow-up to
yes,
that point
please.
really
Yes.
quickly? Because I have this incredibly clear memory of my grandfather. I adored my grandfather.
Mm,
He was wildly smart. I could give you his background, but World War II vet, um, teacher, uh, lieutenant colonel in Army Reserve. Like, he was
mm,
amazing, right?
mhm,
And I really had a deep love for this man. And I visited my grandparents um, every summer. They lived in Phoenix. I saved my money. I bought my ticket. So, I mean, I adored them. And the issue is that my grandfather was racist, like just racist, which is weird because he served in World War II with a lot of people, but he was racist. Lived in the Southwest, so particularly racist against Latino peoples, Mexican peoples, that sort of thing. And I always tried to kind of quietly say something. And one day we were standing in a line for a bank and he was making a comment. And I looked at him, I was in college, and I said, Grandpa, you know you're both going to the same heaven, right? And he paused. He'd never paused before. And all he said was, I suppose that's right. That was it. Now, I can't say that his behavior changed, right? I mean, that was, again, a person who had lived certain beliefs for so long but he paused,
Wow.
right? And that was a very practical connection of the metaphysics or the metaphysical belief with like particular behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to add that because it's
Wow.
exactly what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
the belief system didn't match. And this is the same man who is one of those people I named as like living his faith earlier. He said nasty things, but he did amazing things. So I was trying to correct the speech because he was kind, generous, all of those things in action, but he said
Mm.
nasty
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But he
Mm-hmm.
paused at that. Huh. He had not
Wow.
thought of it in that way.
That's cool that you made him pause in that way. I'm really so happy that you added that because I think it really just drilled down this point, and perhaps it's generational to a degree,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's all I have to say. I unfortunately, yeah, we've both experienced racist grandparents. That doesn't take away, right, from the fact that he was still
I
living
loved him
his
dearly.
faith every single day. I mean, I've literally
I
never
loved him.
heard anybody describe somebody live their faith the way that you have described your grandparents
Oh
living their
yeah.
faith.
They're
That's
they're amazing.
wow.
And I loved him dearly.
Wow.
So I'm not forgiving that racist speech in any way. It is one of his moral failings, right? Like I discussed some of mine or one of mine. He
Hmm.
had a moral failing too. Um, but
Mm.
tying, and I didn't have the words when I said that. This was before I started reading philosophy. I didn't
Mm.
have the words to say, Grandpa, there is a dissonance between your metaphysical beliefs and your ethical actions, right? Those things don't match. I didn't have those words. It just was like, I'm tired of listening to the racist stuff, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
So finding the words to look back on that and say, "Oh, I see what's happening," was so helpful.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, I agree. Finding the language to articulate something that you were
Mhm,
living or feeling in that moment.
mhm.
Yeah, it's an incredible feeling. And we all have moral failings, right?
Of course you
That's
do.
part of the
That's
human condition. That's what you said in the last
precisely.
episode,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
There are two things that mark the human condition,
Yep,
fallibility and finality.
that's right. That's my belief.
Are you afraid to die?
That's an interesting question because I fully admit I don't know what it will be like. Um, when I was younger, regularly said I was afraid of dying, but not of death, meaning I didn't want to suffer. And some people experience pain before their death. I would prefer not to have that. But death itself, I'm very curious about. I don't worry because of my belief system. I don't worry about like an eternal condemnation. It doesn't fit in my metaphysics. Now, I'm not saying that I get somewhere and all of a sudden, that's a possibility. But in terms of thinking about how I try to live, an afterlife is not what compels me to do the things that I do. So I don't know what it will be like. And it might be lights out, it might be enlightenment, it might be an entirely something else that we haven't even conceptualized. So the philosopher in me is curious about it. I'm not saying like I don't want to die right now, but right now I'm not afraid of it. I would rather not have a painful death, which is true for all people, right?
Mhm.
And medicine is improving in one, their understanding of the dying process, their ability to explain it to family and friends, so that's not terrifying to the family, their ability to treat pain and symptoms as we die. Um, but we all know not all deaths occur in a medical setting. So I'd rather not do that. But right now, I'm very curious about it. I'm not afraid of it. On the other hand, I'm young and healthy, relatively young and healthy. And I do think Heidegger and Derrida had maybe a point, which is, yeah, you just don't get it yet, right? You don't understand the vastness of this question. And that might be true. That might be true. Uh, but it's not, a fear is not what moves me to act in the ways that I do.
Hmm.
Can I be afraid? Eventually, yes. Um,
Mhm.
am I afraid right now? No.
Mhm.
Uh, not saying that I don't have other emotions around it, but fear isn't what motivates me. I will say though, I'm afraid for other person's deaths, right? People who I love.
Mhm.
I'm afraid of them dying because of the pain it will cause me.
Mhm.
So, it's not that I don't fear death in general. I don't fear my death because I'm either going to experience it or not. I don't know. But I do fear the death of loved ones.
Mhm.
Different kind of question, though.
Mhm. I like the word curiosity instead of fear, right? Being curious about
Hmm.
death and dying and what's next, and greeting that question with curiosity and not
Hmm.
fear, judgment of other people's beliefs about
Hmm.
death and dying, right?
Trying not to have
Yeah.
judgment, trying not
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Um,
So, okay, do you have any thoughts, any additional last notes on that point?
I will just say that working in hospitals as an ethicist,
Mhm.
in adult hospitals particularly, you get kind of the bulk of the consult cases are end of life cases in some way.
Mhm.
And so I think my training has helped me, and the experiences of consulting have helped me be less judgmental about individual belief systems, because all patients deserve um, a death as painless as possible, deserve as a dignified human being respect, deserve the care and treatment that their family wishes to give them after they pass. So, bathing rituals, these sorts of things. All human beings deserve that without question. So, working with individual beliefs has helped, I think, helped me understand that we're all going to die, but the ways that we die might be very different. Nonetheless, the respect that the person is owed is the same. How that respect is carried out can be different, but I have learned from being through various consult cases with various belief systems and various levels of devotion within belief systems. All of that stuff has helped me try to recognize. I believe Gandhi said this. I haven't verified it and I haven't looked at it for years, but he was asked if he believed in Catholicism. He was like, we're all going the same place. This is just another way to get there. And that is a rough paraphrase. And I can't even promise you that he's the one who said it or that he said anything. But I do tend to look at it in that way. We're going to the same place, which is dying. I don't know about after, but we are going to that place. These are just different ways to get there. Now, what happens after? I don't know. I guess that's it.
So, to close,
Hmm.
I want to ask you the same question that I asked you
Hmm.
in part one,
Hmm.
which is if you could think of someone in your life that you have crossed paths with that
Hmm.
has changed who you are or
Yeah.
a perspective that you have on the world, how you show up in the world, how you do life. And if you could think of that person, you don't have to say their name, but finish the line from Wicked for good, which is because I knew you, I have been changed for good. So if you could
Hmm.
finish because I knew you with
Sure.
whatever you'd like to say to that person.
Yep. Well, I've already talked about my grandparents, so I would put them in there. But I will say, because I knew my aunt, which is still on my grandparents' side, my life has been changed for good because she is one of the most generous, most giving, most humble people I've ever met in my life. And she lives as a Catholic. And I do not mean she lives according to doctrine that shuns certain people. She is welcoming, she is forgiving. She does not judge flaws in others. It She is simply an amazing woman. And I will pitch in here, sorry, very quickly. My sister-in-law um, is also Christian, not Catholic. She too lives her faith. And these women have been inspirational to me in, again, opening myself to other belief systems, but recognizing that importance of the the connection between act and belief. So, yeah, they have been inspirational.
Hmm. Well, Dr. Garcher, thank you for the gift of this conversation and for joining for part two.
So fun. Thank you for
Yes.
having me. Really an amazing conversation.
Yes,
Thank you very
absolutely.
much.
Of course. Thank you. Until next time.
Thanks.